should pull out. What? So the good dot that I want to hit them with is Fulmination. I can spurt when I'm out of mana, I guess. 24 mana, I have 149. No, you can't really spurt that much, huh? You didn't sit down? Oh, right, I have to make this corpse. I should look around at the other sales. Shutter frame XL. A wall cabinet and a large wood box, but... Oops. The guy's selling a T2 for a backpack and an anchor for 200 scrap and all that. What is this? Like an anchor and a boat building station and a small boat. I can those things are all. Oh no, steering wheel and all that. Oh, okay. So let's go buy that stuff because I don't know it. That was all my scrap? Yeah, it was. But that's okay. We can get those things, I guess. We'll recycle more things for more scrap. What was that sound? Look, I heard him really bad.
Autopilot engaged. Warping to station. Warp drive active. Approaching station.
Ooh, is that garage door? It is. Right on. Garage door's good. I need strength of glass window. I need scrap. This keyboard got unplugged and it's already dying. I have to plug it in. There we go. What else? I won't use those, so recycle those. I will use that later. I'm hungry now. I'm going to cook something. Oh, I want that shield.
Docking permission requested. Docking permission requested. Docking permission requested. Docking request accepted. Autopilot disabled. Waypoint reached.
Can't get two. Yeah, I'll do him. Okay. Oh, yeah, server is down, which is funny. So, okay, that's a good time to eat something. It's 3 in the morning. I will go to bed at 4 today. I'll be right back. Oh, ICE lawyer ruins her life. How the Nazis brainwashed determined people to the final solution.
The system sucks, this job sucks. Sometimes I wish you would just hold me in contempt, Your Honor, so I could get a full 24 hours of sleep. Now, you could pay me $1 billion, and I still would never say that to a judge. But when a federal judge asked why ICE was ignoring court orders, government lawyer Julie Lee snapped. and that exchange went viral. And fellow lawyers immediately split into two camps. Julie Lee is a hero or Julie Lee is a villain. And the answer is probably both. But this moment happened inside a federal courtroom after ICE illegally detained 5 people who were lawfully in the United States. And after you scratch the surface, there's a lot more going on here than a lawyer meltdown. One lawyer's breakdown inadvertently shined a light on a government that breaks the law with impunity, ignores court orders, and breaks the soul of even the people trying to do their best. Now, we've all seen it. ICE agents box in someone's car, draw their weapons, drag the person out of the vehicle, and then haul them away in handcuffs. Then they're immediately flown to a detention camp near El Paso, Texas, to make sure they don't have an opportunity to object. But what happens next? Well, attorneys file emergency habeas petitions in federal court showing proof that the person is here legally. DHS is required to respond, and if the judge orders release, the government must comply immediately. And that's where Julie Lee enters the story. Miss Lee was a lawyer for the Department of Homeland Security who volunteered to temporarily work as a special assistant U.S. attorney for the Department of Justice, handling immigration cases during Operation Metro Surge, often representing ICE. Now, Judge Jerry Blackwell called Miss Lee into court to answer for DHS's failure to comply with court orders requiring the immediate release of 5 people who were illegally confined. All 5 of them spent extra days and nights in prison after the court ordered them free. But Judge Blackwell didn't mince words. Quote, "A court order is not advisory and it's not conditional. It's not something that any agency can treat as optional while it decides how or whether to comply." He emphasized that the government's obligation to follow court orders matters most when, quote, liberty is at stake. Detention without lawful authority isn't a technical mistake. Quote, "It is a constitutional injury that unfairly falls on the heads of those who have done nothing wrong to justify it. The individuals affected are people. The overwhelming majority of the hundreds seen by this court have been found to be lawfully present as of now in the country." And critically, he noted that the overwhelming majority of detainees appearing before his court had been found to be lawfully present in the United States. And I think that point hasn't gotten nearly enough attention. ICE isn't just occasionally sweeping up someone who's here legally, which would already be bad enough. In reality, these cases involve thousands of people who never should have been stopped in the first place. And the worst part? Even after a federal judge ordered their release, the government still held them. So the purpose of this hearing was simple. The government's lawyers, Julie Lee and Anna Voss, had to explain themselves. So hours before the hearing, the lawyers filed a notice saying that the attorneys were under extraordinary strain. But Blackwell did not want to hear it. Now, side note, we're talking about the transcript of the hearing, and although a court reporter is always present, they don't always release the transcript unless someone orders that transcript and pays for it. And we have this because lawyer Daniel Suter immediately paid for the transcript. He also skeeted out the original money quote because he was covering the trial in person. And in January, Dan trained hundreds of Minnesota lawyers on how to support resistance to ICE in Minnesota, including preparing them to file habeas petitions like the ones that were the subject of this hearing. He's a big reason why so many people have been able to challenge their deportations before it's too late. So thanks to Dan for shedding light on this. But back to what Blackwell said, quote, "If the government undertakes an enforcement operation of this scale, one that results in the detention of large numbers of people, including individuals who are lawfully present in the United States, then the government assumes a corresponding obligation to ensure that each detention complies with the Constitution and with the court orders governing release. Volume, that is the volume of cases and matters, is not a justification for diluting constitutional rights, and it never can be." And then he delivered the line that cut to the heart of it. "What you cannot do is detain first and then sort out lawful authority later." Now, this might as well have been a shot at Justice Brett Kavanaugh's widely reviled concurrence that allowed ICE to stop people based on personal characteristics. Kavanaugh hypothesized that these stops would be some kind of constitutional catch and release, where the immigrants would provide their papers and would be over in a few minutes. Now, as a concept, catch and release is a terrible idea. The idea that you can stop someone without probable cause or reasonable suspicion to even ask for their ID is, antithetical to democracy. But in practice, it's even worse, because DHS turned Kavanaugh stops into what are effectively catch and holds. The 5 people detained by the government in these cases all had proof that they were in the country legally, and all 5 of them wound up in a Texas prison camp. And when Blackwell ordered them released, the government simply didn't comply. So detain first, sort it out later is exactly what ICE had been doing in Minnesota. And ICE's lawyers had been virtually unresponsive to the court. Judge Blackwell had to issue follow-up orders, sometimes 7 or 8 times, just to get basic information about releases that should have already happened. And it left him mystified, quote, "And why that is so difficult, I cannot understand. Because there's obviously a person associated with the government who is going to the detainee to release him or her. You have their name. You can carry with you a form. The name is on it. Just write the time on it and send it to the DOJ. That cannot be a reason, a source for this problem of noncompliance, because that's too easy to fix. And I don't even work for the executive branch." And the government lawyers could have more time to focus on their jobs and, get people out of prison who were illegally detained. if they didn't have to cook for themselves, which they can do with today's sponsor, Factor. Because Factor, because Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. And the meals are completely ready to eat in just 2 minutes. You can eliminate the hours it would take to shop, meal prep, and cook, so you can spend your day doing the things that you actually want to do. Plus, you'll never get bored with what you're eating. Enjoy 100 plus rotating weekly options from meals and salads to breakfast, shakes and more, all crafted to great taste and nutrition. And compared with the offerings from last year, there's now double the seafood and double the protein options to choose from. Plus, there's now 20 ready-to-eat salads and grain bowls inspired by Sakura that are worth checking out. Because Factor meals arrive at your door pre-prepared and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. At the same time that I could even think about going to the grocery store, my Factor meal is already done. Because sometimes I just want a good, healthy meal without having to cook. And it's the perfect workday dinner. And it's surprisingly affordable, way less expensive than takeout or those pricey delivery apps. Plus, it tastes way better. And you can rarely get enough protein with the delivery apps anyway. But with Factor, most of the meals deliver 30 grams or more of complete protein to support muscle repair and recovery, which has been perfect for me personally meeting my nutrition goals of over 100 grams of protein a day as I get back into golf and tennis. And plus, I've been really into fish lately, and I love their surf and surf option, shrimp and salmon. It's always a bright spot in my day. And Factor is flexible. You can pause or reschedule your deliveries at any time. And now that Factor is owned by HelloFresh, there's a much wider array of meals to choose from. There really is something for everyone, and that's good because I'm already getting hungry. So Legal Eaglets can enjoy both brands at a discount. So click on the link below or the QR code on screen and use the code LegalEagleFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box, plus a free breakfast for 1 year. Again, that's code LegalEagleFB50 at checkout to get 50% off, plus a free breakfast for 1 year. So click on those codes or I'll see you in court. When Miss Lee finally spoke, she asked the judge for understanding. Quote, "I was put on the special mission to help with the U.S. Attorney's Office with all the habeas claims that they have received. They are overwhelmed and they need help. So I have to say, stupidly enough to volunteer, I started with the agency on January the 5th. Now it's easy to feel sympathy for Miss Lee. She was new, untrained, and immediately signed to at least 88 cases. Lee graduated law school in 2019 and spent several years in private practice handling workers' compensation claims. According to her LinkedIn, she remained in private practice through at least September 2024, and sometime after Trump won re-election in November, she joined the Department of Homeland Security. Then in January 2026, she volunteered to help work immigration enforcement in Minneapolis during Operation Metro Surge. Now, if you take a job with ICE after Trump is re-elected, then you don't get to claim total naivete about what you're signing up for. Though in fairness, I don't think anyone expected the full scope of the monstrosity of what is going on right now. Though, as I think you'll see from the transcript, it's clear that she is trying to get the government to comply with the court orders, and maybe in her mind, she is trying to get the people released who the judge has ordered to be released. And it's extremely clear that she's not the one responsible for the non-compliance and the policies at issue here. But Judge Blackwell grilled Lee about 3 cases. The first case involved a man named Segundo. Lee was assigned his case on January 26th. The court ordered DHS to release him by January 27th. So on the 26th, DHS moved Segundo 3 times, from Texas to a Minnesota detention center, then to a local jail. Now, it should have been easy to release him the next day, but 4 days passed and he was still locked up. Judge Blackwell issued multiple orders, but Lee didn't respond. Eventually, the court learned, not from Lee, but from filings in another case, that DHS had quietly released Segundo on February 2nd at 10 p.m. And Lee blamed her inbox. Quote, "I'm not defending all the mishap on the case, but what I can tell you too is, Judge, what most of the email was sent to my DOJ email, and I did not receive it until it was too late. And I still am having trouble accessing my DOJ email. So everything, if it was in my ICE email, then yes, I receive and I will respond. If it's sent to a DOJ one, I don't have a way to access the system." Now, believe me, no judge wants to hear about your problems with email. And Judge Blackwell was not amused. He said, quote, "So you're telling the court that you were brought in brand new, a shiny brand new penny into this role, and you received no proper orientation or training on what you were supposed to do." And Lee said, "I have to say yes to that question, Your Honor." But inexperience isn't a defense here. Lee didn't need to research constitutional law to get this done. Her job was simple: make sure a man who had been ordered released actually walked out the door and tell the court when it happened. And then the judge turned to the second case, which involved a man named Oscar. On January 15th, Blackwell ordered his release within 48 hours. And there was no update provided. 9 days later, Oscar was still in custody. As the court put it, apparently he was being flown from El Paso to Albuquerque, while DHS claimed they would release him on January 27th. Finally, on January 27th, Lee told the court that Oscar was being flown back to Minnesota, but she needed an extension of time because of mysterious safety concerns. What safety concerns? Well, Lee didn't answer despite multiple requests by the court. Now, during the hearing, she finally came up with an answer. Because of the mass protests in Minneapolis, someone from ICE said a protester might show up at the airport and put her in danger and all the agents in danger, and she, quote, "took that to heart." Now, that is not acceptable. The government had no authority to keep Oscar locked up. and ICE didn't release him until January 28th, 13 days later. Now, while this may look like a bureaucratic snafu to some, for Oscar it was hell. His attorney, Kira Kelly, told the court that during this time, quote, he was without food, he was without clean clothes, he was subject to physical danger, watching people screaming in pain with medical neglect, being exposed to COVID, and all of this was happening while he had a court order for his release. And while all of this is happening, ICE agents are telling him to self-deport because he's got no chance to get out of there other than self-deport. And meanwhile, he's sleeping on the floor, if he gets to sleep at all, and he's being lied to, denied access to phone calls to call his loved ones or his attorneys. Now, not to belabor the point, but this is someone who should not have been stopped, let alone imprisoned for 1 day, let alone for 13 days. Now, Blackwell also revealed that DHS was imposing release conditions on people who were supposed to be freed unconditionally. When asked why, Lee said she couldn't control her clients, that it was like pulling teeth to get them to do anything, but she had an explanation for their intransigence. Quote, for a long time, the ICE agency has worked under the immigration court, and they have their own policy and procedures. To get my back home colleagues up to date that federal court is not the same as how immigration court operates, it took a long time and many orders to show cause to explain and let them know that, come on guys, if you don't fix it, I'm going to quit and you're going to be dragging yourself into court. I have to say that too in front of that in order to get it fixed. And to hear her tell the story, she did offer to resign, but her higher-ups begged her to stay on because they couldn't find anyone else to replace her. But these admissions are staggering. Lee admitted that ICE doesn't think it has to follow federal court orders because they're used to their home court advantage, playing in courts where immigration judges are referees. And I'll remind you that's entirely within the executive branch. Immigration judges are not actual Article 3 judges. And that is extremely telling. It's not that ICE didn't understand federal courts. She was saying they didn't respect them. Lee tried to resign, but they couldn't find a replacement. And so she was still on the job as, quote, a bridge and a liaison between ICE and the jail. And then Lee said something truly shocking. She said, quote, sometimes I wish you would just hold me in contempt, Your Honor, so that I can get a full 24 hours of sleep. And yes, procedure in place right now sucks. I'm trying to fix it. What do you want me to do? The system sucks, this job sucks, and I'm trying every breath that I have so that I can get you what you need. She said she sent emails with big, bold font to her boss, Anna Voss, as well as others. She CC'd supervisors. She threatened ICE officials with contempt. But in the end, she had no real leverage. And obviously, Lee felt like she was in a no-win situation because she was in a no-win situation. And in some ways, we, the public, greatly benefit because we get a window into why DHS and ICE are simply not complying with court orders and what they think of the judicial system and the rule of law. But that only makes it more complicated. Well, telling the judge that the system ICE has in place sucks may have won her some fans on the internet. It probably wasn't the right thing for a lawyer who represents the government to do. Like it or not, she had obligations to her client, the government here, and she has a duty to answer the court's questions truthfully, but without throwing her client under the bus. And of course, she also had the option to quit before answering those questions. And she probably should have formally moved to withdraw. Under the rules of professional conduct, lawyers must withdraw from representation when continuing would violate the ethical standards that lawyers must follow. And if continuing representation would mean that you are assisting in fraud or crime or that your client persists in illegal actions, you generally have to withdraw. And you can't keep a represented client if your work would materially help them break the law. And of course, lawyers are bound by confidentiality. So normally you can't stand up in open court and announce my client is committing crimes, that's the reason that I have to withdraw. And of course, this is even more complicated when you're a government lawyer because you can't fire the client, you just have to walk away. And I'm sure Miss Lee obviously felt great pressure not to walk away, to try to get these things done. So she got stuck in this impossible middle position. And then Miss Lee said something else that's worth sitting with. She said to Judge Jerry Blackwell, who is not only black, but is one of the prosecutors who prosecuted Derek Chauvin in the killing of George Floyd, she said, quote, I am not white, and my family's at risk as any other people that might get picked up too, so I share that same concern, and I took that concern to heart. But again, fixing a system, a broken system, I would love to undo all this stuff because no one wants to be in jail. And actually, honestly, being in jail a day to catch up with sleep is not bad right now with all the hours that I put into this job. I mean, it's clear. Julie Lee is a victim in this situation. She's not a victim in the same way that Oscar or Segundo were victims and had to spend weeks in jail when they should not have, but she's a victim nonetheless. But I think here's the reality for every government lawyer in moments like this. Eventually, you will be asked to violate your oath or your conscience. And no matter how much you debase yourself to make it work, it'll never be enough. And to prove the point, after this hearing, Lee was fired. And DHS's spokesperson, Tricia McLaughlin, who sucks, railed at Lee for not defending the indefensible. Quote, "This conduct is unprofessional and unbecoming of an ICE attorney in abandoning her obligation to act with commitment, dedication, and zeal to the interests of the United States government. It doesn't matter how much you beclown yourself, they will always want more." And next, Judge Blackwell turned to Anna Voss, the civil chief of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota. She's the one in charge. So Blackwell asked the obvious question: who specifically is responsible for carrying out judicial release orders? Voss tried to dodge it and wouldn't name names, so the judge rephrased: where does the buck stop? And Voss said it stopped with her and other DOJ leadership. I mean, yes, that's the correct thing to say, but it wasn't the answer Blackwell was looking for. Quote, "This feels like some opaque shield that I can't really see behind to figure out why the orders aren't being complied with. And the answer cannot be that we called ICE and then a shoulder shrug." And Voss tried to pass the responsibility up the ladder, mentioning Pam Bondi and Kristi Noem. Judge Blackwell shut that down immediately. "Are you telling me these orders go to Pam Bondi?" And of course, they don't go directly to Pamela Jo Bondi. Voss admitted that they go to the St. Paul ICE field office at Fort Snelling, but Blackwell seized on that as evasive. Quote, "The orders don't get served on a building. They're addressed to a person. Who is it?" Voss said everything goes to agency counsel, which prompted Blackwell to ask the next logical question: should he have agency counsel appear at a hearing? And I can answer that one. Yes, Judge. The answer is yes. You need to start hauling in everyone under oath so that they can feel the pain of the policies that they're implementing and their failure to implement the orders that the court is ordering. And when pressed about who adds conditions to court orders for unconditional release, Voss again hesitated. Eventually, she conceded that the field office leadership was responsible, specifically David Easterwood and Aaron Rich. Now, those names might sound familiar if you watched our videos about the church protest that led to Don Lemon's arrest. David Easterwood's name in particular should sound familiar. He's the part-time pastor at City's Church, and he was the person activists were targeting when they protested that church. It seems like Pastor David Easterwood is responsible for imprisoning people who should not have been imprisoned, and then also responsible for not releasing them when the court orders them to be released. Seems like he was a pretty good person to protest. Following this confrontation, Ms. Voss later resigned. Now, the hearing ended without Blackwell getting a straight answer out of why DHS kept ignoring court orders, but obviously this goes beyond incompetence. From this transcript, we can surmise that it's deliberate noncompliance, and everyone in that room knew it. ICE simply does not believe that it is bound by federal courts. And afterward, DOJ basically confirmed it. A spokesperson for AG Bondi blamed rogue judges, saying that if courts respected the government's need to properly prepare cases, there wouldn't be an overwhelming habeas caseload or concern over DHS following orders. In other words, if judges would just stop enforcing constitutional rights, none of this would be a problem. Obviously, this situation is untenable. As Judge Blackwell observed, quote, "If you don't comply with the court's orders, you've essentially painted the court into a corner because what are we supposed to do?" Well, here's the answer. You have to start hauling in the supervisors. You need to use your contempt powers. You need to find them. You need to remove any presumption of regularity by the government. And if necessary, you need to lock these people up. Because if there aren't consequences,
I like
they
paneer with
won't stop.
cheese.
Attorney Kira Kelly laid all this out for us. Quote, "We shouldn't need a specific court order to ask the DOJ not to put someone's life in danger. But I can't tell you how many clients I've had to go find who were left on the side of the road with no coat, no phone, no wallet, no hat. They're wearing Crocs or whatever they got pulled out of their house or their car while they were wearing, and it's 0 degrees outside. And we shouldn't need a court order saying, don't put someone's life in danger. And there's no indication here that any new systems or bolded emails or any instruction to ICE are going to fix any of this. We need judicial intervention, and it has to be more than just having counsel be the go-between here, because I think we can see that counsel are being put in position where they're working 20 hours a day, and it's not enough. And sanctions to the party are within your inherent authority and are appropriate to bring in this situation this egregious widespread pattern. But federal prosecutors in Minnesota have now formally admitted that the deluge of habeas petitions triggered by the immigration surge has overwhelmed their own offices. U.S. Attorney Daniel Rosen told the Eighth Circuit that he was forced to, quote, put other pressing and important priorities on hold just to keep up. He said the civil division is operating in reactive mode, canceling other work and scrambling to respond to daily hearings on immigration detentions, even as lawyers and paralegals work around the clock. Wow, guys, this would be so much easier without laws and judges and constitutions. I guess Miss Lee really did say it best. The system sucks. Now, all this highlights why it's so important to get a great lawyer when you're dealing with your own case. Now, after I started this channel, every week I'd get hundreds of comments and emails from viewers who are dealing with legal problems. And they'd ask, can you help me find a lawyer? How do I know if this attorney is any good? And there's a massive gap in our justice system. It's that people don't know how to find the right lawyer for their specific situation. They're scared, they're overwhelmed, and they end up doing nothing or hiring the first attorney who calls them back. And that really bothered me. So I started to wonder, what if there was a different way? What if we could build a law firm that actually lived up to the values that I talk about on this channel? Transparency, accessibility, and putting clients first instead of chasing billable hours. A firm where you don't need to pay anything up front, and your lawyers only get paid if you do to maximize your opportunity for justice. So a few years ago, I decided to fix that problem.
What was that?
I decided to start my own personal injury law firm. And honestly, it wasn't an easy choice. But I realized I was in this unique position. I had this platform, this community, and the experience. Not to get rich, trust me, there are easier ways to make money than starting a law practice. But we did it because access to justice shouldn't be a luxury. Because finding the right legal representation shouldn't feel like playing Russian roulette with your future. And when you work with my firm, you're not just getting a lawyer. You're getting a team that understands that behind every case is a real person with real stakes. If we can't represent you or you're in a state where we don't practice, we'll take the time to try to match you with an attorney in my personal network of lawyers. A national network of some of the best lawyers in the country who actually specialize in what you're going through, located right where you are, not just
He
whoever
shot my
happens to be
base is what it
available.
is.
So if you're dealing with a personal injury, a car crash, a data breach, sexual harassment, a social security or workers' comp issue, give us a call at the number on screen or click on the link below. Now, I can't represent everyone that watches this channel. I wish I could, but what I can do is make sure that when you need legal help, you have somewhere to turn to that you can trust. So whether it's me handling your case or the incredible attorneys we partnered with, you'll get the same principles of honesty and education that we bring to every video. And if you're dealing with a legal issue and you're not sure where to start, check out the link in the description. Let's have a conversation about how we can help you find not just a lawyer, but the right lawyer for your situation. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, making sure that when life gets complicated, you don't have to face it alone. Which is why when you need a lawyer, you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle team.
I'm at 14 out of 25, 9 more. Can't believe my main didn't get the quest. It sucks.
Have you ever thought to yourself what a truly free place would look like? Think about all the things that you're obliged to do just to exist. Pay taxes, respect state laws, get an education, get a job, pay taxes, save for a mortgage, save for a pension, adhere to zoning regulations, pay taxes, and respect the decisions of a government that maybe you never chose in the first place. But pay taxes. The question of how to free oneself from the unwanted restrictions of society is something we've all pondered. But one town in the US seemingly found the answer to the taxes part, at least. They seem to find the key to living in freedom and prosperity, a sort of idyllic return to the state of nature. This was the Freetown Project, and it ran into every kind of problem possible, from garbage accumulation to neighbor disputes to the presence of sex offenders to murder and to taxes, before the whole thing crumbled at the hands of its most unexpected obstacle. And it's not taxes, it's actually bears. All this unfolded in Grafton, New Hampshire, a town now synonymous with the most disastrous libertarian misadventure
Grafton?
out of many to choose from, by the way. So let's get into it. The libertarians. If you followed any of our other channels, then you'll be fairly well versed in all this ideology entails. If not, here is a very quick crash course for you. Libertarianism starts with a relatively simple premise. Leave people alone. The principle holds that the natural harmony between productive people is enough to generally satisfy society's ills and inequalities. If you're not hurting anyone else, you should be free to live however you want, and a government should not provide a hindrance to that. Especially unwelcome, especially to libertarians in the US, is taxation.
I get along with libertarians fairly well.
People of hard-earned income while benefiting unproductive people in kind. In general, many libertarians believe that the less state, the better. By extension, in some circles, like the one we're describing today, to be labelled a statist is akin to being called something like a racist or a pervert. The word freedom also features prominently in libertarian discourse, often revolving around freedom of expression, freedom of enterprise, freedom from tyranny and state overreach, freedom of religion, and freedom to do what one wants with their body and property. The state, at best, should play an enabling role, going about as far as to protect your basic rights and otherwise stepping back to let you do the rest. That's not to say they are all unanimous on what a state of freedom should look like. Libertarian minarchists want a tiny night watchman state to ensure some semblance of law and order, while anarcho-capitalists think that governments should be scrapped totally in favor of purely voluntary systems. Many libertarians are divided on topics like abortion, which some argue falls within the remit of self-ownership, but others argue it causes harm to someone else, in this case the unborn fetus. But by no means is libertarianism a stupid ideology, far from it in fact.
Why aren't
Its
you-
emphasis on individual liberty and not necessitating harm to others stood libertarians commendably on topics like slavery and LGBT rights. But its principles place a large emphasis on rationalism, which, as in the case of the Freetown Project, could represent something of a stumbling stone. One person's reason, you see, could be another person's lunacy. Grafton's libertarians found that out in real life. You see, there were plenty of things they all absolutely did not agree on. Unfortunately, not much of this was foreseen amidst the excitement of the Freetown Project, which began in the early 2000s. Libertarians in the US had long looked for an opportunity to found a community based on their shared principles of free market capitalism. As they saw it, the state should not have any cause to prevent them from doing so, at least one purportedly as free as the US claimed to be. And there was a man who could perhaps turn their objective into a reality. Step forward, John Babiash. Babiash was a former software engineer who felt that the idea of freedom from all intrusions, taxes, and responsibilities was just great, and that Grafton was exactly the place where that could be achieved. He settled in the town with his freedom-loving wife, Rosalie, in the early 1990s, where he spent his time running a small computer company, climbing the ranks of the New Hampshire Libertarian Party, and leading the local volunteer fire department. Keep that in mind, because fire would become a significant feature in the Freetown's life and ugly death. But Babiash's ambitions were hardly restricted to just overhauling a town in the middle of New Hampshire. By the early 2000s, he had twice run for governor of the state on the Libertarian Party ticket, passionately making the case for the cause, but falling short with around 1% of the votes each time. Maybe it wouldn't do his aspirations any harm to have some libertarian fellow travelers come and inhabit the Freedom State. This would at once raise the profile of libertarianism and expand his electorate concurrently. So, with the help of a few allies, a call to action went out on various freedom forums. In late 2003, libertarians started abandoning messaging boards for their New Hampshire Nirvana. Scores of devotees started to arrive in Grafton to help their collective idea dawn. And with that, the Freetown Project was in motion. However, the project wasn't actually a particularly original idea. In fact, it might surprise you that the idea to kickstart a libertarian commune had infamously seen life several times before. Perhaps the most famous example of this was the Republic of Minerva, which had a short-lived existence on the Pacific Reef in the early 1970s. And the fate of Minerva might just have been a clue as to how exactly the Freetown Project would end up. The Republic of Minerva wasn't a great idea, but it was a somewhat pioneering one. The plan leaned heavily on the legal concept of terra nullius, or territory not under the sovereignty of any state, theoretically allowing a third party to claim it through occupation or just squatting. Minerva's ideologues, a libertarian group known as the Phoenix Foundation, decided that if they could find an inhabitable but unoccupied patch of land, pitch their flag in it, and magic up a state out of nothing, it would be the perfect start point for the libertarian cause to spread its wings from. Trouble is, there has never been all that many places in the world that are considered terra nullius. Those that are quite often claimed by some country in one sense or another, but the Foundation thought they found their loophole. They noticed that the Pacific nation of Tonga seemingly forgot to claim sovereignty over an isolated reef called Minerva when it gained independence in 1970. So they marched in with sand, cement, and ambition in tow and officially kind of founded the Republic of Minerva on January the 19th, 1972. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about all of that, but suffice to say that the project didn't last very long. The Libertarians had succeeded in building little more than a concrete platform before Tonga sailed in and kicked them out. The Republic hasn't existed ever since, although some Phoenix devotees did try to revive the idea by re-attempting to settle the reef in 1982. This sort of stubbornness would become characteristic of later libertarian projects, of which there would be many. The thing is, although the Republic of Minerva hadn't accomplished anything, the Libertarians could say that it hadn't failed either. It hadn't, after all, been truly allowed to get off the ground in the first place. One could say it was a characteristic example of state overreach. In this case, the wrathful police behind the Free State Project decided to stop wasting time on tyrannical reefs and find somewhere nice and close to home instead. And now John Babiash seemed to offer the answer. Instead of the hostile waters of Minerva, the next episode of Libertarian town building could kick off in little old Grafton instead. And in some ways, the town was the perfect spot. This was New Hampshire, a state whose devotion to the concept of liberty was made clear by its motto, live free or die. The Granite State was the first of the 13 colonies to declare its own constitution, and Grafton's early inhabitants, going all the way back to the Revolutionary War era, had shown a fondness for freedom that eclipsed even their fellow New Hampshireites. They really hated taxes, to the extent they'd named their town after the third Duke of
We hate
Grafton, a
taxes.
British nobleman who'd favoured lowering taxes for Americans during the colonial wars. Grafton residents have basically spent the period ever since doing their best to dodge their fiscal responsibilities. It was this that had brought John and Rosalie to live there in the first place and become irked at the irritating tax requirements of their home state of Connecticut. The only thing was that Grafton had a bit of a black bear problem, which early Graftonites had resolved by shooting just about every last one they saw. By the 90s, the bear population was still large and occasionally unpredictable, which one resident found out when a black bear devoured her cats in 1999. Still, the bears weren't known to be all that much of a threat to humans, and the creatures wouldn't really become that much of a problem until, well, immediately after the Freetown Project started. But they weren't a problem right now. The space was set for adherents of the cause to abandon their internet message boards and take their vision to Grafton. And so, in 2004, the Freetown Project was born. Its life and demise became the stuff of it, described in vivid detail by Pulitzer Prize-nominated writer Matthew Hongol's Hetling. His book, A Libertarian Walks into a Bear, chronicled the trials of this project, which he visited several times during the course of the Freetown's short but adventurous life. John and Rosalie Babash may have been the project's advance party. That certainly didn't mean they were its only architects. Among the project's vanguard was Larry Pendarvis, a libertarian from Florida who'd had 7 or 8 wives, including 2 at one time, and some rather colourful worldviews. He also had a conviction for possession of indecent images of children, but it was overturned when the prosecutor falsified court documents to describe him as a pervert instead of an introvert. Pendarvis' ideas weren't, in fact, just colourful, and were some of the worst ideological positions in human history. He supported the right to traffic organs, resolve disputes by dueling, and to be able to organise so-called bum fights between willing homeless people. Another founding father of Freetown was Robert Peter.
He likes bum fights
Silent Bob,
that
his
long ago.
who'd had the financial muscle to purchase land in Grafton, as well as Tim Comden, a lawyer who really liked the idea of defunding the local public school district. Another significant figure was Adam Fine, an anti-capitalist, of all things, whose contribution to the Freetown was a survivalist camp known as Tent City, which promoted outdoors living to people who knew nothing of outdoors living in an area teeming with bears, remember. Pendarvis and Comden had scouted the libertarian haven for some time before winding up in Grafton. With help of John and Rosalie, they decided they'd now found their Elysium. And once Freetowners started arriving, it seemed the project was destined for success. The chaos reigned as early as the first town meeting in June of 2004. The Libertarians brought with them their ideals, not least that, you guessed it, taxation was theft. Resultingly, they voted to cut the level of tax in Grafton to almost minimal levels. While this was great news for budding entrepreneurs amongst them, it was not great news for the town. Grafton's meager annual budget of $1 million was slashed by no less than 30%, leading to the downsizing of the police force to exactly one person, Police Chief Earl Kenyon. Kenyon found himself unable to solve crimes because of a broken-down police vehicle, which there was no money to fix, and things like bin collection, road maintenance, and even streetlights soon went out the window. In terms of community cohesion, things got off to a similarly rough start. Longtime Graftonites may have been rabidly opposed to taxes, but that didn't mean they saw eye to eye with their new neighbours on much else, many of whom also failed to see eye to eye with each other. Larry Pendarvis had taken to promoting relocation to the town by way of his own warped ambitions, which included legislation of organ trafficking, bum fights, and cannibalism. This didn't really wash with some of the locals, and the earliest town hall meeting turned into a farce. But it didn't really matter. Freetowners swarmed council meetings, all while buying properties or just installing them.
I think small town council meetings are the most fascinating that this world gets, and I wish I could witness them somehow, all of them, all at once, but you would need a billion lifetimes.
Themselves in Tent City, and Narvis was shepherded out of view and tried his luck at starting a new project in Texas instead. The initial bad press was dismissed as simply the ramblings of one bad egg. Between 2004 and 2009, more libertarians flocked to Grafton, and the Freetown Project was in full swing. As the libertarian activists arrived in Grafton, the population swelled. From a little over 1,000 people in 2000, the town grew to over 1,300 by 2010. That figure was likely an undercount, since many residents were residing in informal accommodation and had little interest in nanny state activities like census taking. It was in those same informal settlements that some of Grafton's existing new enterprises were slated to take off, except the residents just weren't very good at anything, so the Freetown experienced difficulty in seeing its economy flourish. The fact that the population had risen suddenly but unorganically created other problems. Each of those new arrivals had to find somewhere to live and something to do, which turned out to be something easier said than done. What resulted was an eclectic but unprofitable variety of special interest personnel, like Richard Angel, a libertarian whose cause of choice was opposing circumcision, for which he went by the nickname Dick Angel. But, surprisingly, anti-circumcision activism just isn't a lucrative industry, and it contributed little to the free market economy. While nearby towns had, for years, grown slowly and incrementally, allowing the development of new schools, new businesses, new opportunities, and new accommodation, Grafton was now saddled with a rise in population without the means to seamlessly integrate it. The town's gender balance was awkwardly lopsided in favor of men, with around 60% of the 1,200 residents now being dudes. The Freetowners also brought guns. Lots of guns. Some carried guns to fend off bears, others carried guns just to be able to bear guns, and many took their guns wherever they went. But this wasn't the only peculiar fact of life in the Freetown Project. The inhabitants of the tent city began to grow marijuana and cook meth, safe in the belief that Police Chief Merle Kenyon would face an uphill battle to stop them, being alone and with a broken down car against a group of heavily armed squatters who hated statist actors, like the police. Unfortunately, all of this eventually dovetailed with a pronounced rise in serious crime. In 2011, the first murder in Grafton's documented history took place when a man in temporary accommodation shot and killed two of his roommates. Another murder took place in 2013, and calls to the barely operational police service rose dramatically, even as its funding, by way of citizen votes, dried up. Grafton was also left with next to no amenities. It had one tourism attraction, a pretty cool open-pit mine, but little services other than a struggling general store. Its depleted coffers meant difficulty in keeping lights in municipal buildings on, and soon more of the vanishing funds were being spent on a new purpose: legal fees. The Freetowners were enthusiastic litigators and kept taking the municipality to court in order to set various legal precedents. John Babash was no different. He and Silent Bob took a lawsuit concerning the salaries of elected county officials all the way to the New Hampshire Supreme Court in 2010. Babash may have been somewhat emboldened by his recent electoral success. He hadn't succeeded in reaching public office, but he had become the head of Grafton's privately funded fire department in 2008, securing a landslide victory in a vote of 10 people. Fire safety was something he believed in very strongly, and was happy to compromise his anti-authoritarian principles to prevent campfires from burning the whole town to the ground. For this, he was labelled a statist by his peers, and he failed in his third run for governor of New Hampshire with 2% of the vote. Basically, doubled his previous attempts, though, didn't he? As the Freetown limped on, Grafton became a lawless Wild West filled with opinionated people who devoted themselves entirely to refining or introducing new laws. Amidst
And
all
smoking
this,
meth.
Another problem was also brewing, one that was slowly becoming harder and harder to
Methed
ignore.
out tweakers.
Enter the bears.
The bears.
Now, here are places we are not animal behavior experts, but obviously black bears are neither the largest nor the most aggressive you can come across. It's estimated that North America's 750,000 black bears kill less than one person per year on average. That doesn't make them not terrifying, though. A black bear has the strength to topple boulders, coupled with the ability to reach sprint speeds of up to 56 kilometers per hour, significantly faster than Usain Bolt, by the way. You can't outrun them. These two facts alone are enough to make them creatures absolutely not to be messed with. But for good measure, they also possess supreme eyesight and hearing, as well as the ability to smell something like delicious decaying garbage from quite a distance. Nobody is entirely sure why black bears started to show up more frequently in Grafton. Years later, Robert Bobash stubbornly claimed that the presence of the Freetown had nothing to do with the phenomenon, and he knew what he was talking about. He had been living in the town since long before the project began, and a bear had eaten his ram in the 1990s. Despite this, it has been theorized that the project had everything to do with the bears, or at the very least, with their increasingly strange behavior. You see, the free spirit folk of the Free State Project had their own ideas about things that the state would normally do, and usually they didn't do them. As mentioned, their assaults on town funding had hampered garbage disposal, which led to large piles of accumulated rubbish, creating a draw for nearby wildlife. Garbage would normally have been collected by municipal bin collectors, but with no taxes to pay them, they collected, did they? The bears soon began to raid the bins, buoyed by another thing Freetowners had seemingly decided to do, by bear-resistant containers. In parts of North America with bear populations, it is relatively common practice to set up such containers in addition to fences and other deterrents.
I feel like there was a Simpsons episode about
New
this.
Hampshireites had known this. Many of the Freetowners didn't, and as it turns out, didn't really care. Some offered dubious counter-arguments to the containers, reasoning that children could somehow force them open and get trapped inside, even if bears with Herculean levels of strength couldn't. So the bears started descending on Grafton in droves, buoyed by the offer of really low calories. With time, this would become an increasing hazard. But like with everything else, the Freetowners were far from unanimous on how to deal with it. Some took a laissez-faire approach, believing this should be something for the gods of the free market to resolve. They nonetheless began fortifying their properties and going everywhere with handguns as protection against roving bears. Others believed that no response was enforceable, since each resident's property was their realm and they were free to do with it as they pleased. Some ran with this and did the exact opposite of what should be done. A Graftonite known as Donut Lady began feeding the bears with sweet treats, leading not only to an ever larger population turning up at her door, but an ever greater problem for the townsfolk to contend with. This continued for years, and Donut Lady practically bankrupted herself feeding the ravenous creatures on her doorstep. Yet she wasn't alone. Several other Grafton households did likewise. John Babash conceded this, and while downplaying the extent of the town's bear problems, conceded that the feeding was, quote, not good for humans. Becoming addicted to such feeding, the bears seemed to begin actually skipping hibernation, something as much due to the free food as the toxoplasmosis.
The bears just started working all year long, menacing people.
They began to get more aggressive and more daring with their choice of meal. Pets started to vanish, and all of this led to a new kind of fear. As pondered by Hongold's Hetling, who really knew if the animals would become a sort of gateway drug for the bears targeting humans next? The inhabitants of Adam Franz's tent city were particularly vulnerable to the hungry, sleep-deprived, and now lunatic black bears, although they did attempt to resolve the issue by installing a No Bears Allowed sign on the perimeter of the campsite. With time, Tent City shut itself in a walled-up fortress, with the objective of living free seemingly evaporating beneath the scourge of bears. Unsurprisingly, the bear problem didn't get resolved and remained a rather huge issue for the remainder of the time that the Free State Project existed. As they became more addicted to food, more infected with parasites, and as their numbers grew and grew, the incursions grew ever more daring. In the meantime, other parts of the project weren't going well either. Despite the Libertarians' faith in the liberty of the enterprise, Grafton still had no industries and struggled to keep everyday amenities functional. It did have an old church house, which the church had offered to sell for free to the Freetowners. They refused, having no plans to spend even a cent to have the building praised. So, an individual named John Connell stepped in, spending a large part of his pension to purchase the building. Being a religious man, Connell promptly made himself the church's chaplain and sexton. But as noted by the Citation Needed podcast, the departure of church authorities was sort of a damning indictment all of its own. When tax-free providers of nothing pulled out of Grafton because they felt they were getting a raw deal, it could be sensed that something was definitely amiss. Connell didn't succeed in getting as far as to achieve non-profit status, which would allow him to swerve mandatory taxes. He did, however, subscribe to the libertarian stance of just not paying them. As such, his tax bill increased and his personal circumstances deteriorated into impoverishment. Another ugly consequence of not paying taxes was, unsurprisingly, no social benefits. So Connor was forced to live off church collections from his tiny flock, but this was hardly enough to survive on. With time, he was unable to keep the heating on in a portion of the US known for particularly harsh winters, an existence very far from the idealized free market commonwealth many had been drawn to pursue. In 2012, the project was in its 8th year of existence. Nothing had been accomplished, and multiple problems persisted. Most of these problems would require some level of cohesion and coordination to remedy. This left them impossible to resolve for Grafton's free thinkers. But the Freetowners were at least heavily armed, and some realized that this could help them to at least face the festering bear problem. To be clear, murdering bears is rather illegal. Although New Hampshire had liberalized its bear hunting license laws to curb their electrifying population growth, shooting the animals wantonly would still be beyond the pale. And even if it were permitted, not everyone would agree to this being the right course of action, despite the increasing threat. Donut Lady was still spending her savings feeding them, and there were others with moral objections to any mass massacre of the creatures. Graftonite Tim Bowen was one of the latter, although he was made him a minority in the town, when he memorably remarked to Hongol's Hetling, quote, "It's like being a German in Nazi Germany and not wanting to kill the Jews. Jesus Christ." Unfortunately, a drought in Grafton that year left the bears more daring than ever. Despite the best efforts of Donut Lady, they were still hungry and willing to take greater and greater risks. And in late 2012, the inevitable occurred when a Grafton woman was mauled and severely injured by a bear on a porch. So some local men took matters into their own hands. In 2013, they headed into the forest and butchered 13 bears in their dens. The mayor presumes that this wholly immoral and illegal act would see the problem resolved, but obviously it didn't. The Great Bear Massacre of 2013 didn't significantly
The Great Bear
impact
Massacre of
Grafton or in
2013.
New Hampshire, although bear attack reports did temporarily.
God damn it. It's been 100 years and we're doing the same stupid shit that we did 100 years ago.
For the coming months. Hembold Hedling found that the Graftonites were reluctant to share details about the killings. In the course of his documentation of the strange town, the usually cheerful advice of "don't break onto my land or you'll get shot" became the much more concerning "be careful about your questions or you might get shot." The town ambled on, and the bear massacre turned to whispers and was never properly investigated. But the project was living on borrowed time, and things would come to a tragic head a few years later. In early 2016, a fire engulfed the old church house building. John Babash arrived on the scene, but there was little the firefighters could do to tame the blaze. The cause of the fire was not known, but its consequences soon were. The 200-year-old wooden building was gutted and reduced to near ruin. But there was something worse. John Connell was inside the building at the time and he didn't make it out. Tragically, the 57-year-old pastor was found in the wreckage and succumbed to smoke inhalation. The Freetown project didn't live on much further. Surprisingly, it wasn't the disputes, the presence of predators, the piles of accruing garbage, the faltering infrastructure, the church fire, the death of the community stalwart, or even the scores of psychotic bears that put an end to the initiative. No, instead, it was the fact that the whole idea leveled up. You see, you might think that a town populated by criminals, idealists, and some of the most naive people on Earth would be a pretty clear deterrent against similar such projects. But no, the Freetown project may have been a disaster, but it had limped so that the Free State project could lollop. The project was triumphantly unveiled in Manchester, New Hampshire in February 2016, less than a month after the harrowing death of John Connell in Grafton. It seemed to offer something the Freetown had never managed: stability, livability, and, by way of taxes, public amenities. Perhaps above all, it offered some semblance of mainstream political recognition, and in 2017, 17 Free Staters had made it to the 400-seat New Hampshire House of Representatives. None of them were from the Libertarian Party, which continued to flounder in the ballots. But amongst them was Silent Bob Hull, one of Freetown's founders, who served 2 terms for the Republican Party before passing away in 2019. The Free State Project had actually been founded even before its crazy Grafton cousin, going back to 2001 as the brainchild of political scientist Jason Sorens. Its mission was to entice 20,000 of the US's disparate libertarians to one single state, which, after a vote, was chosen to be New Hampshire. The objective was to accomplish this sizable political migration within 5 years. The project missed out on its deadline by about 11 years, but by 2016 the intended 20,000 had signed the Free State Project Statement of Intent. Some of these signatories had by then already taken up residence in New Hampshire, not least in Grafton, to its own great detriment. Still, the project was better planned, better organised, and better funded than its analogue, and the announcement in February effectively wiped out the Freetown's remaining prospects overnight. Their work done, kind of, the Freetowners slowly packed up and shipped out. And what they left behind was a town in a sorry condition. Humboldt Hetling poetically described what remained for the Graftonites as waking up after smashing a house party only to remember with growing horror that it had taken place in your own home. Several years later, he returned to the town to assess the damage. What he found was an empty and squalor-filled tent city. Adam Franz had given up and moved away, leaving behind a failed survivalist camp and a DUI conviction. He also found the wreckage of the church, which had remained in its sorry condition, as disputes between the libertarians and would-be proprietors raged, mostly over taxes. In Street View images from September 2023, the site continues in the same condition of disrepair. Despite all of this, some of Grafton's intransient libertarians had no desire to give up on their cause. Some devoted themselves to supporting the Free State Project, and some even to the full-on secession of the state of New Hampshire from the United States. John Babash went straight into political campaigning and failed in the 2018 State House of Representatives election with 175 votes against the victors' 2,300. On this occasion, he was joined by his wife Rosalie, who also ran in the election. Unwisely, they failed to unify their forces, and Rosalie ran with a total of 113 votes, last on the list. Today, the Free State Project lives on, and around the time of its foundation, it was joined by another libertarian startup in Europe, the Free Republic of Liberland, which was founded on a freebooted patch of land between Serbia and Croatia in December 2018. Both Liberland and the Free State continue to claim adherence today, if not quite the free market utopia promised on the brochure. Grafton retreated back to small-town New Hampshire status. Its population declined in the wake of the Freetowners' departure, but census figures between 2010 and 2020 showed it had risen to 1,385 individuals, a net increase of about 45. Thank you for watching.
Five left. I'm not going to do 5 more tonight. Okay, I'm gonna log. I found a good server. It's awesome. Okay, I'm gonna stop. It is 3:54 in the morning and it's time to stop. I love you guys. Thank you so much for your time. You have been watching Skycat Live. I'm a full-time variety gamer all day, every day. Put me on in the background. Click on the cast face to donate. Come to the Twitch or the YouTube. Give me a like, sub, or follow. This is my website, skycat.live. I have many thousands of videos on my YouTube channel, which is reflected here. I will be placing these videos up Got them all tied and everything. This whole batch of new stuff, and we're putting on like new stuff again. Like producing. Oh yeah. So with that note, I will stop the video and begin the process of stopping this stream.